influence.
I'm excited that my community is starting to make sure their voice is heard.
History.
That was a 58% growth rate since the last presidential election.
Culture.
For everybody that is not Latino American, I wanted to feel like they're on vacation. You know, I wanted to feel like, wow, I'm not in Atlanta anymore.
Breaking barriers.
I used to hang out at the DQ across the street. I got a speeding ticket when I was 16 years old, and I went to pay it at City Hall where I got sworn in as a 46-year-old.
Voices for equality.
There's no conversation, right? Nobody is talking about what does criminal justice mean, what does a DA do?
Celebrating and honoring Hispanic heritage.
It is such a powerful thing when people actually share their experiences.
Hola, hello. I'm 11Alive's Paola Suro. In honor of Hispanic heritage, we're about to take a deep dive into important issues, introduce you to uplifting leaders, and celebrate the rich culture that make up Atlanta's Hispanic community. And it's a community that's growing and changing. New census data shows Georgia's Hispanic population grew 31% in the past decade. We begin with a closer look at what that means and why the actual number may be even more significant.
That's me.
It's the first census Andres Parra and his family participate in after 14 years in Georgia.
So happy to kind of be a part, especially in such a momentous and historic year. Georgia really, grabbed the nation's attention.
They're part of the state's growth highlighted in the 2020 census. Georgia grew by more than 10%, and the Hispanic community grew by more than 31% in the past decade.
When I saw these numbers, I was hoping that they were going to be bigger. We had a really tough hill to climb to get folks to participate in the census.
Those numbers likely an undercount due to the pandemic and the Trump administration's fight to include a citizenship question to the form. The Supreme Court eventually blocked that from happening.
Undercounting communities is a significant problem. Traffic increases. We don't have enough public transit options. We have our kids going to school in trailers rather than actual classrooms.
Jerry Gonzalez, CEO of civic engagement group Galeo, says this growth is important when redrawing congressional lines.
A lot of our communities are hurting because of the pandemic. Communities of color in particular need to make sure that the adequate resources reach them as well.
The last election cycle was an early indication of the minority growth in the state, where the Latino electorate grew by over 141,000 new voters since 2016.
That was a 58% growth rate since the last presidential election. Georgia will be a majority minority state within a few years.
Parra was one of those new voters.
I'm excited that my community is starting to make sure their voice is heard.
Among the many issues front and center, immigration. More than 1.3 million U.S. citizens are facing separation because a family member has been refused a visa or deported from the U.S., according to the American Families United Act. Now, a Roswell father who's a U.S. citizen is trying to push a proposal forward that would change that. And he's now receiving support from his congresswoman.
I love you and I miss you.
3 years later,
Hi, Mom.
8-year-old Ashton still talks to his mother through the screen.
3 times a day.
Not by choice, but by law. For 18 years, his mother, Cecilia Gonzalez, lived in the U.S. illegally. In 2018, she voluntarily left the country after fear of deportation.
She was having anxiety. She was losing hair.
This was a year after President Trump took office and put non-citizens at risk of deportation, changing the Obama administration's focus on those who committed serious crimes. Months later, Ashton started battling a stage 3 kidney cancer with his mom miles away in Mexico.
Almost half his life, really.
Today, he's cancer-free, still without his mother by his side.
I wish she was just here and I could talk to her anytime.
His father, Jason, has been fighting to bring Cecilia home since we last spoke to him.
What do you tell them?
That we're doing everything we can to bring Mommy home.
The sadness has since turned to frustration, with a twinkle of hope weighing on House Bill 2920. The American Families United Act, which was introduced to Congress in April, would allow U.S. citizens to request a case-by-case waiver for the non-citizen family member to live in the U.S. Jason has met with Congresswoman Lucy McBath several times to talk about this. As a result, she's now co-sponsoring the bill.
There's no way to get her back. So our bill gives American citizens more equity in the debate of immigration.
Those authorized to hear immigration cases would deny it if the person is a national security threat or if they have a serious criminal history.
We try our best to be strong and positive.
The crisis in Cuba reaches far beyond the island. Here in Atlanta, families are looking for ways to help. We spoke to Cubans about what's happening and the change they hope to see. Behind this little window is a concept with a big heart.
There you get a lot of Cuban entrepreneurs. If you really think about it, I mean, they're in a place that is completely killing hopes of any of those things.
Ozzy Janis, a Cuban entrepreneur himself, came to the U.S. when he was 13 years old with a lot of dreams. Many, he says, he wouldn't be able to have if he still lived in Cuba.
It's years of brainwashing, it's a year of suppression and oppression.
So he took to the Sandy Springs streets earlier this year with 600 others, fighting for his cousins and aunt who still live in Cuba, and for the many others who are calling for an end to the island's 62-year-old communist regime.
Before you can actually communicate through Facebook and to, you know, a couple other apps. Now everything's kind of still in lockdown.
Food shortages and deteriorating living conditions drove people to rallies across the nation.
Not a single other country has ever had an embargo. Cuba's in a situation where it needs commerce. If they start shooting protesters, governments in Europe who are democratic, you shoot protesters, you're done, no tourists, the regime will collapse and fall overnight.
Many asking the White House to provide humanitarian assistance to the country as it faces its worst economic crisis in decades.
And they've been on threadbare ice now for about 4 or 5 years, and COVID really hurt them badly because they lost their tourist business.
In the meantime, Janis holds on to a little piece of home in these Cuban sandwiches made from his family recipe.
In a year, that could be the next paradise, night and day. From now that is falling apart to one of the most beautiful places in the world.
The lack of Latino nurses has been magnified with the COVID-19 pandemic, which according to the CDC disproportionately affected communities of color. One local nurse is taking matters into her own hands to try and get more Latinos in healthcare.
I know I make a difference, you know, whether it's talking to my patients, talking to the family, it's something special that we share.
From clinic to clinic, nurse practitioner Imelda Reyes will always find Spanish-speaking patients. But when it comes to nurses, it's a different story.
Do you think there are enough nurses who are Latino right now?
No. I think when you look at the population as a whole, the number of Latino nurses is so low.
But just how low? A 2017 report showed that out of 3.3 million registered nurses in the nation, only 5.7% were Latinos. That's why Dr. Reyes went into teaching to try and get more Latinos into healthcare.
Bring the students into a real environment. We're trying to really work on diversity within our profession. There aren't a lot of people like me that look like me.
Statistics show that more than 73% of nurses are white, and the pandemic has highlighted that need for diversity in healthcare.
By the time they were seeking help, it was like they were really sick.
She says it's important to have nurses who understand both the language and the culture.
Their faces light up, and it's just really nice when they know that they're going to be able to, talk to someone in their own language. Here in Georgia, there aren't a really great number of us.
Still ahead, voices impacting votes.
So happy to kind of be a part, especially in such a momentous and historic year.
How increasing influence at the ballot box is leading to big changes and new faces.
Beyond tackling serious issues, Atlanta's Hispanic community is finding more power in political office and an even louder voice at the ballot box.
That's me when I got my certificate.
After 14 years of living in Georgia, Andres Parra and his family became naturalized U.S. citizens just in time for the 2020 primaries.
It was a series of miracles, but I think when you're an immigrant, you're in such a vulnerable place that you depend on miracles, unfortunately, most of the time.
For years, he volunteered to help people register to vote, but last year, his time to vote finally came.
I just felt happy to kind of be a part, especially in such a momentous and historic year for the country, but Georgia really, grabbed the nation's attention.
Andres is one of the more than 140,000 new Latino voters in Georgia since 2016. That's a growth of more than 57% in the state since that year.
The 2020 election had very tight margins, so this growth in the Latino electorate really had a powerful effect on the outcome of the elections here in Georgia.
This is a list of the top 10 counties with the highest Latino turnout in 2020. According to Galeo, most of the Latino electorate is under 40 years old.
Certainly there's a lot more work to do with those under 40. Certainly that's where we focus a lot of our efforts.
Efforts that Andres hopes to continue being a part of.
I'm excited that my community is starting to make sure their voice is heard.
Among the new leaders helping shape police, a former major officer with the Brookhaven Police Department who's taking over as chief of police for the city of Morrow. The Puerto Rico native sat down with me one-on-one to talk about the significance of his new role. On June 22nd, Renan Lopez de Azua got a different kind of birthday present.
I got an email from the city of Morrow asking me if I'd be interested in putting in. I thought it was April Fool's.
His swearing-in ceremony for Morrow Chief of Police makes him one of the first Puerto Rican-born citizens to lead a law enforcement agency in Georgia, a title he doesn't take lightly.
Latinos in general, at large. Those are the jobs you take: construction, landscaping. And we do it out of pride, and we do it because we want to do it, because we want to give our kids a life. I'm super happy, super blessed.
While Puerto Rican born, these Morrow streets are familiar to him.
I used to hang out at the DQ across the street. I got a speeding ticket when I was 16 years old, and I went to pay it at City Hall, where I got sworn in as a 46-year-old.
A full circle moment. Lopez de Azua hopped on a plane in the late 80s, moving from the island here, where he learned English watching Star Trek and reading comics. He graduated high school, returned to Puerto Rico, and eventually came back to Georgia in 2003 to work for Clayton County Police. He worked on homicide cases there for 4 years.
Real victims, real family. That kind of brought to my attention how important that relationship is with law enforcement and with the community.
Lopez de Azua, whose family members were in the military and army, says he used what he learned there on his next jobs, working undercover for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Brookhaven PD, and now Morrow PD.
I'm not afraid of police reform.
According to Pew Research, Hispanics are the fastest growing major racial or ethnic group in local police departments in the U.S.
I think it is extremely important that kids get to see that, because sometimes all they get to see is just a parent getting arrested, or like previous summer, they were getting deported.
Lopez de Azua hopes agencies will continue hiring diverse people in order to ease tensions and connect with the community. The chief isn't the only one taking the lead. Clark and Oconee counties elected Deborah Gonzalez, making her the very first Latina to be elected district attorney in the state. She explains her journey to the prominent position. The former state representative, who has lived in Athens since 2007, says she will bring many changes to Oconee and Athens-Clarke County. Those include no death penalty, reducing mass incarceration, eliminating cash bail, and ending the school-to-prison pipeline. According to official election results, the Democrat, who ran as a progressive candidate, beat nonpartisan candidate James Chafin by nearly 900 votes in the runoff. She'll take over for Ken Malden, who has held the position since 2001 and is retiring.
I had run unopposed for 16 of those years, and you know, when you're running unopposed, there's no conversation, right? Nobody is talking about what does criminal justice mean, what does a DA do. That we just, okay, he's the only name there and people vote for him and that's it. And I said, no, I think that needs to change, and so decided that I was going to run.
He's no flash in the pan.
I gotta eat something, I gotta cook Latino food.
How one Latino chef is serving a little taste of home that goes far beyond borders.
It's what takes us back home, what gives a sense of comfort, a sense of belonging.
Learn more about these stories and more on 11alive.com/voices. Latin culture is influencing the Atlanta art scene, from food and dance to music and murals. There's so much to explore. Just steps away from the home of the Braves.
We're at the park. The volume is a lot more.
Walk into El Super Pan.
I gotta eat something. I gotta cook Latino food.
And you're quickly transported to Latin America.
I want the rest of the Latin America to come in here and feel, home. And then for everybody that is not Latino American, I want them to feel like they're on vacation. I want them to feel like, wow, I'm not in Atlanta anymore.
And in the kitchen is Hector Santiago, mixing his travels to Latin American countries with his Puerto Rican roots.
I would say I'm not a Puerto Rican chef, I'm a Latino chef.
He was raised in the mountains, growing and cooking ingredients straight from his backyard. Decades later, he moved to Atlanta after attending culinary school in New York City.
I couldn't find a restaurant that I could fit in, that I could go and be the chef of. So I wound up saying, no matter what, I'm gonna open my restaurant. And I opened my restaurant with very little money, just like, I call it, with passion and grit. But what is hard to find, I would say, are concepts like this.
A concept where you've got a San Juan bakery in the day offering Spanish Caribbean food to a dance floor at night.
You can go to the poorest place And still everybody had a smile on their face, they want to dance, they want to party. It's a Latino blood, you know? So, and when we come and migrate, we're craving that.
A home away from home. That's what Santiago hopes for the more than 3,000 people a week who step into this specific location.
It's what takes us back home, what gives a sense of comfort, a sense of belonging.
Among the art making an impact, a beautiful new series along the Atlanta Beltline. The murals tell the story of indigenous people in the Caribbean. Puerto Rican painter Lisette Correa explains her mission. For about 3 months, Lisette Correa worked to display Puerto Rican history on the Beltline walls. But for her, this was more than just a passion. This was her mission.
When we talk about the civil rights movement and freedom and equality, it's also important for us to highlight the Caribbean.
Her highlighter is a paintbrush and her canvas, the Beltline walls.
I wanted to really pay homage to the Taínos in Puerto Rico.
The Taínos are indigenous people of the Caribbean who were declared extinct in the 1560s. But ever since, historians have argued that's not the case. Artists like Correa have too. Many say it wasn't extinction, but rather paper genocide, a term used to describe how people can be made to disappear from government records, even erasing them from the census, according to the National Geographic.
I took a DNA test and I found out that I was 12.7% Taíno. So we are not extinct. We are still here. We're still alive. And I'm here to share the stories that haven't been told.
Stories of her ancestors now line up the walls along this walking path. From the strong women depicted on the pillars, her grandmother at the center of it all, to the bright greens representing El Yunque, Puerto Rico's national rainforest.
It's about your blood, tu sangre.
The artist, who goes by Art Addict, hopes each image will not only inspire people to research, but also educate.
Ever since the massacre of the Taínos and that information being torn away from us by our colonizers, there's been so many other things that have happened to Puerto Rico since then that, you would say that Puerto Rico's forever been in slavery.
History beyond the textbooks.
Up next, taking a page.
You're letting the kids know, I see you. And you're special and you're important.
What one Atlanta community is doing to make sure learning is accessible in any language.
Among the many things that makes our community strong, the power to bring people together in any language. That's why one Gwinnett County teacher is working to make sure nothing gets lost in translation, one book at a time. They tell you to not judge a book by its cover. In these stories, that expression becomes even more important.
It's like the cheapest way to take a vacation is through a book. And it is the most non-threatening way that I have ever known to introduce our kids into other people's nations, cultures, just the amazing world that we live in.
These 18 books, some written by Gwinnett County Schools educator Nuri Castillo Crawford, aim to have people of all ages read between the lines and between the different languages to find the true meaning of what it's like to live in a melting pot.
But it is such a powerful thing when people actually share their experiences and then share how powerful reading a book about a little immigrant girl and how that was their journey.
Topics like immigration, fitting in, and finding one's self-identity are all explored. Right now, they're available in 5 different languages, including Spanish, Vietnamese, and Korean, in addition to English, so that people of many cultures learn from one another, whether it's at home or in school.
85% of our teachers in this country are white, middle-class women, which, through no fault of their own, that's just a statistic. But I feel like when we make an effort, go out there and look for the books that are diverse and that help reflect the students that we are teaching, you're letting the kids know, I see you. And you're special and you're important.
The Gwinnett County School District, which has some of the most diverse schools in the state, already has some of these books handy. Gracias. Thank you for joining us on this celebration of Hispanic heritage. Learn more about these stories and more on 11alive.com/voices.